Well, welcome Des Moines community to the fiscal year 2023 budget forum for Des Moines Public Schools. My name is Tom Ahart, Superintendent of Schools for DMPS, and along with me is Mr. Shashank Arora, the Chief Financial Officer for Des Moines Public Schools. We're entering the budget year of FY23, which begins on July 1st of 2022. We're on a fiscal year that runs July 1 through June 30. And despite receiving a little bit more than 2% supplemental state aid from the state this year, we're now in 11 years running with an average of less than 2% supplemental state aid. So needless to say, the additional funding that we receive year over year has not come close to keeping up with inflation. And so we find ourselves in a position of having to continue to be extremely strategic about where we make our investments, and also needing to trim from the budget year over year. So you have an opportunity to submit questions to us over the website. Please do so. We will respond to those questions and post those on the website. And with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Arora to get us going into the presentation itself.
Thank you, Tom. So the agenda that we have for today, or what we plan to cover today, is what has been our budget calendar, what have been the development constraints for the budget, what is the DMPS financial strategy, what is it that the board is adopting and certifying, what are the long-term considerations, especially for the general fund forecast, which is the largest fund. And then in closing, we are going to provide you a slide where you can submit your questions electronically, and we'll be happy to respond. So we typically start working on the budget once the year starts for the following year. So in July of 2022, we will start working for the next year's budget. The board work sessions starts around October. They continue till end of March. And we publish it in the register around last week of March. So this year we published it on March 25th. The virtual forum is on right now. This will be posted on our web portal for everyone to see. We have the public hearing on April 5th, and we finally submit the budget to the Polk County auditors on April 15th, and that is when it is final, and the year starts on July 1st, as Tom just mentioned. So we're going to cover what are the budget development constraints, and instead of reading all the bullet items, we have separate slides for all of them, and that will really help out clarify what the development constraints have been. Yeah. This is not a new slide. It's been in place for a long time. And only thing I would recap is a lot of decisions which we as a district and the board makes are pivoting around these three goals of the district, which are related to reading and maths. This slide is fairly critical for the community to understand. And some of the key things that I would highlight over here is that we cannot present a budget that falls lower than 15% in either solvency ratio or an unspent spending ratio. We cannot present a budget which omits credible projections of revenue and expenses. And by credible, we mean something which is material. There are always small changes which keep happening here. And we cannot plan that the expenditures are more than the revenues that we will receive in a particular year. Something which is very critical for us to understand is that not all funds can be spent on anything the district decides. State and federal law dictates allowable expenditures even for general fund dollars. And in a later slide, I will clarify some of these things. An important concept, again, to understand is spending authority. And some of the key things that I would highlight over here is that it is illegal for a school district to exceed its total spending authority. It's the limit on spending authority which the district has and not the amount of cash or the fund balance. We may be sitting on excess cash, but if we don't have spending authority, we cannot spend it. And this is tied directly to the student enrollment, which is the cost of the pupil. So where do we get the spending authority from? It's a very simple formula. Number of students, cost per pupil gives us the spending authority. The nuance which comes over here is that the student count is always of the prior year. So what we would use in October 2021 is used for next fiscal year of 2022. Cost per child is set by the Iowa legislature, and that is largely the SSA or the state supplementary assistance that we get. And Tom alluded that we've been below 2% for the last 10 to 15 years. And spending authority is then a combination, is paid through either state aid and, is paid through a combination of both state aid and property taxes. So how can we grow the spending authority? Three simple ways. Increase in state supplemental aid, on which we don't have much influence. It is decided by the governor and the legislators. And I have a slide which will be coming up later, which shows where we have been historically. Increase in student enrollment. And that has seen some significant declines in the last 2 years due to the pandemic. But that decline has been experienced even at a state level, not just at the district level. And then increase in miscellaneous income. So this slide very categorically shows how the state supplemental aid has really been reducing over a period of time. From 1973, if you see, there were times when we were getting as high as 12 to 15%, but for the last almost 12 years, it has been below 2%, except for one spike that we had in between. This is an important number to really note, the way our enrollment has been declining. And as I had mentioned, the pandemic has really accelerated that decline in enrollment, as you would see over here in the last 2 years, the way we have seen the decline. And miscellaneous income is largely driven either by the federal funds, and as some of you may know, that the district and actually a lot of government authorities have received ESSER funding. This is a limited amount of funding that we have received, which will expire in 2024. But that is part of the miscellaneous income. And then the investment income, and with the lower interest rates that have been prevailing, the investment income has really declined. As some of you may have read in the press, the Fed has been deciding to increase the interest rate. We have already had one rate increase this month, and they expect another 4 to 6 increases in this fiscal year. So that would help the district to some extent as far as the investment income goes. These are two important concepts for us to understand, and we have leveraged the budget guarantee even last year. This is basically to help the district in case of declining enrollment, where the state pays the district at least 1% over the prior year for the regular program cost. This is funded solely with property taxes, and it requires board approval. For FY 2023 budget, because of the declining enrollment, we will be getting a budget guarantee a little north of $1 million. And in FY 2022, where we had a larger decline, it was close to $3.9 million. On-time funding is a little different than budget guarantee. And this provides additional spending authority to serve the kids in the year in which they enroll. So as I had alluded to in my previous slide, that we have to use the enrollment numbers of October for the next year. If in the next fiscal year, the next school year, if students do come back to the district, as we expect some of the refugees coming back, then we can apply to the state and get spending authority. Something I would like to highlight, this does not get us cash, but it brings us spending authority. And fortunately, the district does have cash, and the biggest constraint that we have is a spending authority. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about the financial strategy of the district. In FY 2020, the district decided that we were on a slippery path and both our solvency ratio and unspent spending authority was reducing. The district decided that we would be on a glide of reducing $24 million year over year for a period of 3 years. And as you would see in the column, in the first set of columns, what our spending authority would be by the end of those years. We did relatively better than what we had projected. So in FY21, we reduced the amount of reduction from $24 million to $14 million. And again, it shows what the projected spending authority is. 2022 was very similar to FY21. And FY23, which is the current budget that we are talking about, we are trying to show the spending authority less categoricals. So categoricals, even though are part of the general fund, they are extremely restrictive in the sense they have a defined purpose for which that money can be spent. It cannot be spent the way the district can spend the general fund dollars. So we decided in FY 2023 that we will, instead of showing overall general fund spending authority, we will just show it for the general fund less categoricals. As we develop a budget, we try to have certain guiding principles under which we work. First and foremost is what exactly will be our spending authority and solvency ratios. And the goal of the advisory team is to provide recommendations with minimal impact to students and employees. And we tried to reach our target through a combination of both cost reduction and revenue generating ideas. Something that I would like to highlight is, since this is year 3 that we are working on it, this is going to become increasingly difficult, and the district will have to make some hard decisions going forward if we want to maintain healthy solvency ratios and unspent spending authority ratios. So what is it that we have planned for FY 2023 as far as reduction of expenses or revenue goes? We had a building on grant, which we sold. Historically, this money would have gone either to Save or PEPL, but there was a change in legislation, and this money can now go to general fund. So it's helping us. It's a one-time saving, but it is helping us in FY 2023. We are launching what we call as a break fix program. This is a program where we buy an insurance for the district to repair its electrical and electronic items as and when they need maintenance. And instead of paying it from the general fund, we can leverage the management fund for this. The third item is something which we have done historically for the last 3 years, which is basically trying to move expenses from general fund to either save or PEPL. The $1 million reduction in enrollment is more of an organic reduction in positions as the enrollment has been declining. And the SSA, which has been approved finally, which is higher than 2%, is also going to help the district to the extent of $500,000. So these positions that we are eliminating, or some of the costs that we are transferring, which is the $0.6 million from general fund to other funds, is highlighted in this change. So the $1 million impact is 5 positions in elementary schools and 7 in middle schools. Again, driven because of lower enrollment of students. These positions of 4.5 FTE, which were being paid to general fund and were part of central stores, as we did our analysis, we found that majority of the work that they're doing is being done for the food and nutrition. So these costs are being transferred to the food and nutrition. There are some FTEs which are primarily working for SAVE. Their costs have been moved from general fund to SAVE. And one FTE in technology, which was open, we are not backfilling it. Tom, if you can kindly speak on the SMART goals.
As Shashank pointed out earlier in the presentation, the board a few years ago adopted SMART goals, and those have to do specifically with student achievement relative to 3rd grade reading and 9th grade algebra. Obviously, there are programs and curricula and offerings that we have for students pre-K-12 that aren't directly tied to that either we want to maintain because we think it's the right thing for our students, or we're required to provide per state code. So when we look at the total budget, what we're attempting to do here is to show above and beyond what's required, what is our additional investment to accelerate progress relative to the SMART goals. Now, in a budget of our size, these numbers that you see on this particular slide having to do with our 3rd grade literacy goal don't appear to be huge investments. They're significant for sure. They're in the millions of dollars, but they're not huge. And the reason that it looks probably surprisingly small is what this does not capture is the cost of the staff that are actually executing the work. So we have done, despite budget challenges, we've striven very hard to keep our class sizes low, especially in the early elementary level. So we keep a class size of an average of 23. If we were to, and that requires a significant investment. So if we were to increase class size, let's say to 25 to 1 ratio, that would be millions of dollars of savings. So what's difficult to display in this budget is budget reductions that were not made that essentially are additional investments. But with 83% of our general fund is spent on staff. So that's where we need to find most of the savings. And what this slide illustrates is that we're not attempting to find savings by reducing the staff level at elementary, specifically early elementary, and that we're investing millions of additional dollars on top of regular programming to help pursue the SMART goals relative to literacy. If you want to advance the slide there, Shashank. So some highlights relative to investments in our literacy SMART goals. We've invested in new curriculum from kindergarten through 8th grade. And so one portion of the additional investment is for that curriculum. The other big investment with regards to the high quality curriculum is support for teachers in the form of professional development and instructional coaching. So in order to reach these goals, we need to make sure that all of our students are receiving grade level instruction. And that means that if a student enters a grade and they are not at grade level, we need to make sure that they're receiving the instruction that's appropriate for that grade level, as well as providing scaffolded support so that they can be successful in those more challenging standards, so that they actually accelerate learning and make up for gaps so that they can get caught up with their peers and ultimately help us reach our board SMART goals. Extended learning, our year is time limited. We have we get funded by the state for 180 days of school, or 1,080 hours of instruction. That's not enough, especially for students that enter the school year with gaps. And so we've expanded through the use of ESSER dollars, those COVID relief funds. Last year, this year, and the following year, we'll be providing broader offerings for our students, um, longer in length and more intense in focus, to help make up for lost opportunities from COVID and to make up for the gaps that many of our students organically come into the district with every year. And of course, we'll continue to focus on the implementing the new curriculum with fidelity and ensure that the priority standards are the top focus of the teachers and students in the classroom to ensure that we can reach those goals. Next slide. So mathematics looks similar. We did invest in new mathematics curriculum materials, and that required to successfully utilize that curriculum. We needed to provide professional development and coaching for our staff. This is an ongoing effort, and again, while this does not look like a huge investment, what we have to recognize is that the ninth grade algebra goal is not a goal specific to ninth grade. Many things need to happen from kindergarten through 8th grade to ensure that a student is algebra ready when they reach ninth grade. And so adjustments have been made to curriculum, priority standards have been identified from kindergarten through 8th grade to ensure that every student, regardless of their starting point, is algebra ready by ninth grade. So what this does not capture is the cost of staff. So all of the algebra teachers for sure, but then also all of the middle school math teachers and the significant amount of time and investment that we make in mathematics instruction K through 8. And a big part of that, again, as I mentioned earlier, is keeping those class sizes, especially at early elementary, at a ratio that allows our teachers and students to experience the most success in the classroom. Next slide. And this slide really illustrates what the levers are that we've been pursuing to pursue the board's SMART goal for ninth grade algebra. I talked briefly about the curriculum. You'll see that the new curriculum does reach back to even to pre-K, to early childhood programming, all the way through ninth grade. We want, again, to make sure that every student, regardless of grade level and regardless of the experience that they've had prior to entering whatever grade they're in this year, does not prevent them from accessing grade level instruction. And so we're attempting to to fill in those gaps for students that have them, while also ensuring that they're receiving the same grade level instruction as the rest of their peers. Summer learning will continue to be a really important piece of helping us reach our Algebra Smart goal. And in 22-23, the budget year for which we're presenting today, you can see, I don't need to read them for you, but you can see the specific levers that will be of most import as we move through this next fiscal year. And then finally, our social emotional learning, there is not an identified board goal for social emotional learning. A few years ago, when the board went out to the community to get the community's voice into their thinking about where we wanted to put our focus, several issues came up from the community, from all of you, that were tied basically to social emotional learning. And while we had work going on in that arena in the district, there had not been a board policy to follow with that regard. So the board passed a new management limitation relative to social emotional learning. And so we have been implementing a district-wide comprehensive approach, articulated approach in social emotional learning, and that has required some significant investment. And again, while this total here that you see on the page for FY22 and then for next year FY23 is in total less than $1.25 million. What you don't see here in large part is the work that the vast majority of our staff who are responsible for implementing are charged against. So all of this work regarded to social emotional learning largely takes place in the classroom with our classroom teachers. And so it's difficult to capture exactly what that genuine investment is. And so what we've done here is to show above and beyond what happens in the classroom, the supports that are being invested in our students and our staff. You'll see that we tried to start at a basic level with all of our schools and then go deeper with a smaller number of schools. So we didn't bite off more than we could chew. And so you can see that this year we have a full phase 1 implementation at 22 pilot schools and at early childhood. And that work then will continue to go deeper with those pilot schools, but we'll bring everybody else along in similar fashion. We're trying to make sure that while we want to build a district-wide system that's cohesive and coherent, that we do it with fidelity and that there's a high level of quality of implementation. And it's just too difficult to do that at every school site all at once. And so we have a phased in approach. A lot of work has happened and will continue this year. And then we're going to take another big bite at the apple in FY23.
So as we are talking about budget, and as I had mentioned in an earlier slide, that it's going to become increasingly difficult for us to be on the glide to continue to reduce the costs. These are some of the strategies that we are evaluating as a district as to what is it that we can do to continue on that glide of fixed cost reduction. So the demographic study will be done sometime after the budget has been approved. If we have seen that there has been a decline in the enrollment and fairly significant in the last 2 years, we have to evaluate to see, should we consider with the same number of school buildings, is there room to consolidate? because as we would consolidate, there could be some reductions in general fund dollars. That is one of the things that we as a district need to be evaluating. Some of you may be aware that an athletic committee was formed a few years back, actually a year and a half back. They had come up with their recommendations, how we as a district can improve in different areas as far as athletics go. This would have a cost, as in when we start implementing their proposal. The third thing that we're evaluating is the academic ROI, which is basically to evaluate which programs do we need to continue with and what programs could potentially either replace or be dropped. And the programs that get dropped would probably be providing the least value to the students. And then transportation, as to basically to see what makes the most sense on a long-term basis, or what should be the long-term strategy for the district as far as transportation goes. These are some of the heavy-hitting things that we are hoping to discuss in the next few months after the budget is approved. So what is it that the board is adopting? One is the set of expenditures, and the other is the property tax rate. So the total expenditure that the community is approving is $609 million. And this includes not just general fund, but all the other funds. Our ending balance was $249. So the total is $859 million. The proposed tax rate is 15.34. And I would show in the next slide how is that constituted. So if you would see, the property tax rate is reducing from 16.06 to 15.34, which is 72 basis points lower in 23 than what it was in 22. The big drivers for this reduction are, one is that the state aid has been increased from 87.5% to 88.4%. The other item is the budget guarantee, which I had alluded to earlier, that is funded through property taxes. And the budget guarantee in FY22 was $3.9 million, and in FY23 is $1 million. So that also has been impacting the reduction in budget guarantee amount, and hence the lower property tax. And the third item is the instructional levy, which is driven by formula, and there's not something that we can influence. So those are the three big drivers which are impacting our property taxes in FY 2023. And the next slide basically shows, split into different things graphically, what exactly are the components of the property taxes and how it is changing year over year for the last 4 years. So what are the long-term considerations? Certified enrollment, the objective is to be either stable or growing. And as you can see, it is reducing. The unspent authority is maintain or build. And we have been fairly consistent, I would say, year over year. And even if you look at the ratio, again, fairly consistent over here. Solvency ratio has also been fairly consistent. And the state supplemental aid that we received last year or the current fiscal year is 2.4%, and what has been approved for next fiscal year is 2.5%. This does not meet or help paying entirely for our salaries for the staff. Just as an example, 1% of state supplemental aid pays only for 0.5% of our staff salary. And when the inflation has been hovering north of 7%, this does not help us much. The settlement with the largest union, DMA, last year was 2.05, which was both salary and benefits. And right now it's under discussions, and we still have not finalized what the rate for FY23 would be. So general fund accounts for 79% of all the revenue that the district gets. The most significant fund and the most critical fund. And majority of our discussion in this budget is focused on general fund. Anything that is not accounted for in any other fund is accounted for in general fund. And an important concept and distinct concept to understand is cash and spending authority. And I had mentioned that more critical is spending authority versus cash, at least in our case. So how does these budget and projections look for the 5 years? Our solvency ratio, as you can see, would be getting closer to what our goal is in the next 5 years. Our unspent spending authority, unless we make those hard decisions, we will continue on a trajectory which would actually make us in a situation by FY26 that can be questioned by the state. And this is the one that we are showing, which has got both regular and categorical. And we are showing over here separately, if we remove the categorical, as I had mentioned before, that it is restricted to where we can spend. This is the last line shows over here, what exactly will it be if we looked at pure general fund dollars? So the assumptions in building the above half forecast is state supplemental aid. We have received 2.5%, but we are budgeting at 1%. Hopefully it's going to be higher. So this situation that we are showing over here for unspent spending authority could be better. Our enrollment, which has been declining, we used to budget for a 250 student reduction. We are at this point in time for this budget, budgeting for 500 student reduction. Now, if we can arrest this decline, again, the above scenario would improve. Compensation is based on negotiations, as you're aware of. And then this is the reduction path for expenditures that we are planning for at this point in time. This is a slide which I wanted to share. If anyone has any questions, please send it to budget@dmschools.org. This presentation, including what Tom and myself are talking, would be shared on our portal. And I would encourage the community to please listen to it. And if they have any questions, to please contact us. So the board would be certifying the budget on April 5th, and hopefully we would get all the comments from the community at least a few days prior, so with that we can have an opportunity to discuss and provide our feedback. Tom, any final comments?
Yes, I would just like to close by saying that we do keep a very close eye, not only on how we're investing our dollars to achieve the board goals, but also on the effect that the budget has on our community. A couple of years ago, we went out to the community to ask for the first time, the maximum voter approved PEPL or physical plant and equipment levy amount. And we promised at that time that it would not net in an increase in your property taxes. We've certainly held true to our word in that regard. So while our PEPL dollars have increased, or our PEPL revenue has increased significantly, that has not come at a net increase in property taxes. We were the last school district, at least in central Iowa, to make that move, and we're very appreciative of our community for doing that. The demographic study that Mr. Aurora spoke of earlier, we had engaged with a firm to execute a very thorough, in-depth demographic report for us, and that was getting to us in draft form right before the pandemic hit. The pandemic has changed a lot of things, and over the course of the past 2 years, in addition to COVID-19, we're also navigating some additional changes in the state legislature that will have a negative impact on our ability to manage enrollment. So we're going to refresh that demographic study to make sure that the board has the best, highest quality information and timely information, so that we can engage meaningfully in those really big questions that Mr. Aurora shared a little bit earlier in the presentation. And then finally, um, I think it's important that we recognize, despite challenges that we've been facing, especially from a finance perspective, we've continued to keep the district on very sound financial footing. We're actually, despite the challenges, we're very well poised to keep a very healthy spending authority, unspent spending authority, and solvency ratio. And we appreciate the community's support in rolling with the changes that have just been necessitated by year over year over year substandard state supplemental aid. So thank you for viewing. Mr. Aurora, thank you for sharing the nitty gritty about the budget. Please send your questions to budget@dmschools.org, and we will get those posted online as we're able to answer them.
Thank you very much.